This is the Middle-earth philosopher. One of the interesting stories in Middle-earth is the one regarding the similarities between High King Thingol the Sindar and the sons of Feanor, and for that matter, Feanor himself. It seems from the get-go that the two never liked each other, despite more moderate voices in either camp trying to soothe things out. To start out with, Thingol's worldview has always been as an elf with an independent streak and arguably somewhat unpredictable. Of the three original ambassadors to Valinor that eventually became High Kings, he seems to be the one who is most aware of his own desires and wants and follows after them, in despite of what the Valar want. He falls for Melian out of a desire to be with her that is greater than his obligations to his people, since he ends up getting lost for a long time, or his allegiance to the Valar and the two trees of Valinor. And though this is temporary, that allegiance to Melian and that desire for Melian still remains. This doesn't make him evil per se, but it does make him, in my opinion, unreliable. You don't know what he's going to do if he finds it contradicts his own feelings. To put it another way, Thingol has no allegiance to any higher moralities or goals other than what is most dear to him personally. And on top of that order is himself. Despite never completing the second journey to Valinor, he still holds himself as an equal to the high elves of Valinor, and rightly so. Other Noldor who are not as prejudiced also acknowledge his exception among the Sindar. However, he also seems to treat this as proof positive that other elves should be subservient to him, such as his anger at the Noldor for not seeking his permission to inhabit lands that were already under his rule. This despite being that he not having neither the power nor the number of people to occupy and hold them himself. And in fact, this is a large part of why Feanor's sons so easily disregard him, and the factor that he is considered an Eldar by default, as it were. With the possible exception of Maedhros, the sons of Feanor are quite prejudiced against the Sindar, whom they regard as inferior because they are not Eldar, but Morinquindi, dark elves, who never completed the journey to Valinor, and therefore got none of the blessings of being in the presence of the two trees or taught by any of the Valar. As far as they're concerned, the Sindar are not as strong, smart, or sophisticated as even the lowest of the Eldar, and that they arrived in Beleriand to find it nearly overrun by orcs did not help to sway that opinion any. That Thingol was one of the first elves to go to Valinor and was a high elf by right held no power over them because Thingol bore none of the outward markings or power of an Eldar. Any proper Eldar should have wiped the forest floor of the orcs as soon as they had shown up, just as easily as the Noldor had. Nor had any of the Noldor, except for Finrod and Galadriel later on, seen the location of Morgoth at its height and glory, where perhaps they may have seen that the Sindarin High King was not quite the country bumpkin that they took him for. And I use that phrase deliberately because this is a case like if a New York City billionaire moved out of the middle of Manhattan out to the middle of nowhere in the Midwest and hid just how much money and how much power he actually had, and dressed like it as well. And though this is not explicitly mentioned, after the First War of Beleriand, Thingol's only real power lay in his queen, Melian, because she was a Maiar, and I would argue the most powerful being in Middle-earth proper, since Morgoth had used up a lot of his power and authority to corrupt Middle-earth by that point. And that if Morgoth did have that power, then he just would have overran her like he did the rest of the Valar at the beginning of time. All that to say, Melian is the one providing the power to maintain the magical barrier around Doriath, not Thingol's armies. All of this was well known to the sons of Feanor, and I think they found it so pathetic that rather than asserting their dominance, just to let the Eldar king, quote unquote, rule his small realm, whereas the rest of the Noldor would just do what they wanted to do elsewhere, and let Thingol live in his delusion. That said though, Thingol was just as abrasive as the Noldor princess. He doesn't trust them in part because his gut told him something was up, which was indeed later confirmed, but also too because they refused to acknowledge him due to him being one of the first Eldar. I think in his mind that only Finwë and Ingwë, the other ambassadors, carried any equal weight of authority to himself. Moreover, he is also biased against humanity, as Tolkien fans famously know, represented by the tale of Beren and Luthien. It's ironic that the haughtiness that the princess shows Thingol also shows to Beren, whom, despite being of the royal house of Feanor himself, is regarded by Thingol as inferior. And when Beren stands up for himself, Thingol becomes so enraged by his audacity that he nearly goes Feanor mode to have him killed right there and then, but instead decided to do it off-screen, as it were, by sending him on a doomed quest to retrieve the Silmaril from the crown of Morgoth himself. And although Beren is successful and Thingol does renounce his prejudice against humans, the disdain between him and the Noldor princes still remains, thanks to the actions of Curufan and Killigrim against Melian. When Maedhros presents the call to arms for the final assault against Angband, Thingol utterly rejects this because of what had gone down beforehand. And what made it worse was that when Killigrim and Curufan get word of this, that they outright swear to wipe out Doriath itself and kill Thingol after that war is over. Yeah, that really helped matters. So it would seem like both the Sons of Feanor and Thingol himself were both motivated by a sense of entitlement. And because of that point, I think you can argue that there's no real good guys here in this feud. Yes, Thingol is right in holding the princes accountable for their Alqualondë slaughter, but Thingol is arguably just as bad at many points as the Sons of Feanor, if not Feanor himself. And I have to wonder how it would have gone down if Thingol had to deal with Feanor himself had Feanor had lived. I think the similarities between the two is so strong that I often refer to Thingol as Feanor Light, and it's also one of the reasons why I don't like that character. Thingol's sole claim to fame, really, is his trip to Valinor and marrying into the divine bloodline that outlasts him. That's about it. Everyone else has accolades to their own name by their own actions at multiple points throughout the First Age. Thingol doesn't really. And yes, he repents of many of his worst qualities, yet still falls victim to them when his haughtiness finally gets him killed by the dwarves, whom are really the antithesis of someone like Thingol and the Fëanorians, in that they don't take shit from anybody nor bow to no one if you try to make them. Then you get what Thingol got if you try. And yes, I am acknowledging that those dwarves were very corrupt as well, but the point remains. Ultimately, the Cold War between Thingol and the Fëanorian princes was really a Cold War of egos. Both at some level thought of themselves as better than the other. And I would argue that if outside circumstances had not intervened, one would have had to give. But otherwise, what do you think? Do you think Thingol is as bad as Feanor? Or do you think Feanor and his sons were worse? Feel free to comment below. And this is the Middle-earth Philosopher, and you guys have a good day.